Right. I'm very sorry, everybody. I am completely everything, literally everything here has been taken ages to set up. I've moved my microphone, I've moved the webcam, I've got all the setup, and yeah, I even got this laptop is more powerful than my flipping desktop, specifically for this purpose. And yeah, the Wi-Fi decides it's going to die for the first time in a year. Hey. So, for those of you wondering how the signal came back, I went and got something out of a cupboard. I never thought I'd have to bring it back out again. A 50-meter long Ethernet cable. So there is now a very, very long Ethernet cable snaking through the house. So if you hear random cursing, shouting, screaming, and a loud bang, that's probably someone's tripped over it. Right. Where was I? Run to the south. Yes. And I saw the comment somebody came up with, which was about the bad coal. So yes, the German battle cruisers do have bad coal. Then it's not the best. However, bearing in mind that the Invincible and its subtype battle cruisers are capable of sort of 24, 25-ish knots, maybe a fraction more if they're pushing it. The Queen Elizabeths are kind of 24, 25-ish knots again if they're pushing it. And then you've also got to take into account that the German battle cruisers, most of them are designed for 26, 27 knots plus. Yes, they make it a fair bit faster than that on trials, but that's trials. You can rig them to a certain degree by running through shallow water. But more to the point is the fact that the German battle cruisers, when they ran their trials, they obviously had good coal and good crews. So with crews, well, not bad crews, but just regular crews and bad coal, they're going to lose a knot or two. But as was actually shown at Dogger Bank, apart from Blucher, they could pull away from an Invincible type. So they can make, even on the bad coal, 26-ish knots at least, and possibly more. So yeah, they can pull away, but the speed advantage is marginal. And as I said, given that the engagement between the first scouting group and the battle cruiser fleet was very much a meeting engagement where they watched each other get closer and then only realised exactly what was happening almost as the shooting began, the chances are that we're going to end up with the 5th Battle Squadron and the battle cruiser fleet able to engage for a while. Hipper won't want to keep that engagement going and will have to try and pull away, but it's going to take time, so his ships are going to take damage. And then this does lead to a question which you can't really answer without extensive wargaming, which is how much of the Hipper's first scouting group is going to be able to pull away, because operating at 26, 27 knots assumes that they haven't taken bad hits to their funnels, their engine spaces, etc., which some of them might. This is kind of what happened with Blucher at Dogger Bank. It got hit and the hits slowed it down, and that allowed it to get mobbed and overwhelmed. So whether or not Hipper loses a battle cruiser or two in the run to the south, it's possible, but I wouldn't want to count on it necessarily. And yeah, as Schleppy42 points out, the Invincible and its subtypes not keeping up might actually be a good news for them, because Indefatigable, well, New Zealand is blessed, so New Zealand will be fine, but Indefatigable obviously wasn't, and yeah, Indefatigable is the one ship in all that lineup that doesn't have either steel or divine protection capable of withstanding 11 and 12-inch gunfire, so at least on the belt. So Indefatigable falling behind is probably not awful news for Indefatigable. But anyway, the point is that overall there is a change. Rather than BT desperately trying to cling on long enough for 5th Battle Squadron to come save him, this is very much going to be a pursuit of 1st Scouting Group. Now, 1st Scouting Group, obviously, once it realises it's in trouble, is going to run back towards Scheer, and he's going to let him know, well, there's a lot of British ships chasing us. However, and this is the interesting thing, in a lot of ways, this might actually tempt Scheer more forward than historically, because historically it was battlecruisers versus battlecruisers, so the big question was, where are all the battleships? If 5th Battle Squadron is known to be with the battlecruiser fleet right from the start, it actually then raises the possibility, at least in Scheer's mind, one would think, that the British have sent out a reinforced battlecruiser fleet, which is exactly what he wants, to try and isolate. So the German High Seas fleet is probably going to be much more enthusiastically coming north to pursue and join up with Hipper. Now, that then leads to a rather interesting scenario, because Sturdy, now in command of the battlecruisers, is going to be chasing south. He's going to be feeling fairly confident about things, and so when the High Seas fleet appears, that's going to be a little bit of a rude shock. So the battlecruisers are going to have to wheel about and run north along with the battleships, the 5th Battle Squadron, obviously. And here is where you may very well see at least one, possibly more battlecruisers lost. Because, well, with the best will in the world, there's probably still likely to be issues with stacking charges and removal of flash protection. Obviously, with me being a Jellicoe replacement several months earlier, I would have done my level best to get rid of that, but changing cultures takes a while, so they might, the flash doors may well be back, but the stacked charges may still be present in the turrets. Sturdy might have wiped it out, he might not have. It's a variable that's a bit difficult to pin down exactly, and so at that point I'm going to hazard a guess that at least one battlecruiser is probably lost in the confrontation with the High Seas fleet, if for no other reason than the fact that, as I said before, Indefatigable's armour just isn't up to standing up to the incoming German shell fire, regardless of anybody else, even if all flash doors are in place, even if all magazines and charges are properly being handled. The 11 and 12-inch shells are perfectly capable of punching through pretty much any part of Indefatigable's protection. And the poor thing's probably, its best chance is the fact that if it has fallen behind, it might be able to double back outside the range of the German battleships. So there's that. Now, the next stage of things that you've got to think about is our new hypothetical run to the north. As I said, Scheer is probably now thinking he's got things right where he wants them, and off he goes. Sturdy, hopefully, is actually going to do his job, unlike Beatty, and communicate to Jellicoe exactly what is going on. And so Jellicoe is going to know in advance, one, the Germans are coming, two, at least German battlecruisers are heavily damaged, possibly one or two stopped or sunk, you never know. Although that does raise another interesting possibility, which is that if a German battlecruiser gets crippled and left behind in the run to the south, assuming that nobody just tries to mob it, that battlecruiser may actually end up alerting Scheer as to what's coming to him, but that's a variable that we can't. It's such a niche variable that I don't think we can necessarily count on it happening. So we've got Scheer coming north chasing the battlecruiser fleet. We've got Jellicoe now with a bit more information, able to deploy more precisely. And this is a key difference between the first and second encounters at the historical Battle of Jutland with the Grand Fleet. Although Jellicoe manages to cross the T both times, in the second crossing of the T, he does actually far more damage to the German fleet because he's able at that point to have his fleet in a nice tight line formation. At the point that Scheer encounters Jellicoe the first time historically, although it is a crossing of the T, it's not a firm crossing of the T, it's more of a slightly drunken crossing of the T like this. And also, I know this is probably mirrored because I'm doing it, doesn't make sense to me, so like this, let's say. Also, Jellicoe's line is bent over a bit like this. So then they're all spread out, so only limited parts of the Grand Fleet can fire at any given target. Now that Jellicoe has more information, he will be able to make that T-crossing maneuver, but he'll be able to make it with a much, much tighter grouping of his ships, which means that when Scheer runs into it, there's going to be a heck of a lot more damage. There's also going to be a significant problem in that with first scouting group more badly battered, they're not going to be in quite the same position they were historically. Also with 5th Battle Squadron fully engaged, along with Battle Cruiser Fleet, it's less likely that Jellicoe will dispatch Admiral Hood in 3rd Battle Cruiser Squadron with Invincible and its 2 stablemates. So there's that to consider. He might still do, and you might still end up with the Invincible versus Lutzow, but I don't think it necessarily would happen. But either way, to be honest, it doesn't affect the overall outcome of that T-crossing maneuver particularly well. Now, of course, Scheer is going to do his battle turn away. That's the sensible option. That's what the German fleet has trained for. The German fleet will disappear off into the mist, but the lead ships are going to be significantly more badly damaged. So I'm in as Jellicoe, I'm in a much better position. Now, I'm not having to deviate too far from what Jellicoe historically did at this point. I can head south, and obviously I, from the future, know that Scheer's most likely option is to then try and cut back east, so we're going to get that same meeting engagement you get with the second fight between Scheer and Jellicoe that you do historically. But at this point, remember, the lead elements of the High Seas Fleet are more badly damaged. The battle cruisers are more badly damaged, and they were pretty knocked about as it was anyway. So that it's fairly questionable as to whether they'd be able to conduct their death ride, or if they can, probably fewer of them can do so. Now, that means that in addition to obviously the vanguard of the High Seas Fleet being more badly damaged, they're taking a really concentrated pounding again, and historically again, the German vanguard was actually starting to break up. Its formation was breaking up under fire during the second encounter, which was why the battle cruisers got sent on their death ride, to give Scheer time to extract the High Seas Fleet. In this case, it's probably fairly likely that any battle cruisers that go in a sort of pseudo death ride, one, they're more badly damaged and outnumbered in the first place, so they're going to get hit even harder, and chances are possibly more of them are going to get lost. Then the leading elements of the German fleet, because they're more damaged from the first encounter, there's more likelihood that they're going to get stuck, either disabled or slowed down, so there's probably a few ships going to be lost there. And I haven't had to I haven't had to change Jellicoe's tactic about turning away from the torpedo boats, which I think strategically made sense. But so far, when Scheer pulls his second manoeuvre to pull away, I've now probably chalked up at least 2 or 3 German battleships and probably 3 or 4 German battle cruisers, which is a good haul. Now off we go down south, and obviously I could exploit my hindsight and go, yes, well, I know he's heading for Horns Reef, so I'm going to go there. Well, 2 things. One, I don't actually know that now, because the High Seas Fleet has taken a much heavier battering than it did historically. So whether or not Scheer's decision is going to be the same, I don't know. And also, that's horrible abuse of hindsight. Now this is back where moving Beatty to the westernmost of the Grand Fleet's battle squadrons comes into its own, because obviously historically during the night we had major problems with commanders seeing German ships and not engaging them, and also not reporting to Jellicoe. Now obviously BT probably is still not going to talk to anybody, or if he does, he's probably going to send a signal or something like the Martians have arrived, resurrect Thunderchild, or something equally irrelevant to the period. But what it does mean is that as and when the Germans appear, he will engage them. Apart from anything else, he's going to be immensely frustrated that Sturdy got the battlecruiser squadron, and if Sturdy's pulled off a couple of kills against the first scouting group, he's going to be even more annoyed that he's missed his chance at glory, so he's going to be aching to take a pot shot at somebody. So I, as Jellicoe, am taking the Grand Fleet south overnight in pretty much the same formation that Jellicoe did historically, and Jellicoe's decision-making was relatively sound. He missed, for lots of various reasons, which I'll explain in an upcoming video, the fact that the Germans were actually going for Horn's Reef. But the point of it now is I don't know exactly where Scheer is going, but I know he's probably going for either Horn's Reef or where Jellicoe thought he was going. So I'm heading, as Jellicoe did it originally, and then if the High Seas Fleet cuts east and they start to cut across my rear, and obviously Revenge, Marlborough, those ships under Beatty's command, see the Germans going across their sterns, Beatty is gonna go nuts. He's gonna start shooting. Where's that meme where it says, "So I started blasting"? That's gonna be Beatty. He is gonna go ballistic, quite literally. If the Germans don't cut across there, then hey, I'm going to block off their main their line of advance to the southwest, and I meet them at dawn. Fantastic result for me. They cut east of Horn's Reef. Beatty starts shooting. This is where it gets interesting. I now have direct evidence that, well, there's a massive gunfight going on, so clearly something's up. I can figure out that they're going for Horn's Reef this time. Fantastic. Right, I know where I need to go for the morning. However, I now have a capital ship fight in the dark, and with the best will in the world, the Germans are better at that. So what I am probably going to do at that point is turn for Horn's Reef, order the Grand Fleet to engage where necessary, but to try and pull away, which, given that Hipper and Scheer's forces are slower thanks to the pre-dreadnoughts and everything else, and the damage they'll have taken earlier, I can do, and I'll use my torpedo boat and destroyer flotillas to basically assist Beatty in disengaging for the moment and put some more torpedoes downrange, because, well, that worked on taking out the Pommern, so... So hopefully I'll be inflicting a bit more damage on the Germans overnight, and then we have this sort of dichotomy of choice. If Scheer changes his plans from historic and goes straight south by southeast, I meet him at dawn. He has to fight his way through me with a much reduced and slower fleet, and, well, that's the Trafalgar the Royal Navy wants. And if he does turn east and heads for the Horn's Reef, then Beatty's going to let me know by means of voluminous gunfire, and then I'm going to go to Horn's Reef, as I said, and I meet them at Horn's Reef in the morning, and then I get the Trafalgar that everybody wants. The only difference is that with the Horn's Reef scenario, because the Germans are going to end up with the vanguard and middle of their fleet engaging the rear of my fleet at night, where they, as I said, probably have the better of it, and I'm having to use my destroyer forces to disengage, I probably am going to take some losses overnight. In that engagement. The Germans probably will take a few as well, because their ships are starting off in worse health. And then you have to also acknowledge that regardless of whether or not it's a Horn's Reef or the other main approach that's being taken by the Germans, just because I'm standing in the way of the Germans in home, and just because I outnumber them, it doesn't mean the Germans are going to lie down easily. The Germans will fight tooth and nail. If they know they're completely cut off, then they'll fight to the death. If they think there's any chance of forcing their way through, they'll do it. I mean, we know historically where an objective needed to be met, Scheer would throw the battlecruisers in for the death ride. So if Scheer feels he needs to throw away maybe, say, his remaining battlecruisers, the pre-dreadnoughts and some of his more battered dreadnoughts, basically throw them away as meat shields to try and punch the rest of his dreadnoughts through, then he's probably going to do it, because most of those ships probably aren't going to make it for very much longer anyway in a straight-up fight, so he might as well preserve some of the High Seas Fleet instead of wasting all of it. So it's going to be a very messy engagement. The only saving grace, really, at that point, in terms of a major advantage to the Royal Navy outside of the numbers and firepower aspect, is that a lot of his ships, as was mentioned earlier, are going to be running on bad coal. A lot of his destroyers historically were running at very low speeds, even slower than pre-dreadnought speeds. I don't know what's going on there. Interesting. So yeah, they're going to be running at slower than pre-dreadnought speeds because their engines are completely clogged with clinker and ash, or the boilers, I should say. So all of this is going to add up to a rather interesting little scenario where the Grand Fleet will take more losses than historically speaking, for sure. You don't take on the High Seas Fleet and basically corner them like a rat in a trap without taking some pretty nasty losses. But it is going to be fairly decisive because by the time that engagement starts, I'm probably got a 2-to-1 numbers advantage, I've got a formation advantage, and I've got a speed advantage. So that would pretty much be Jutland for me, and that being the second Trafalgar the Royal Navy wanted. Well, the slightly weird thing is I'll probably then end up being promoted away from the Grand Fleet pretty quickly because of all the medals they'd be throwing at me. So there you go. Now, how long have we been going? 22 minutes on this one at least. Okay, so about a bit for Scheer. So switching over completely to the other side, as Scheer, what can I do? Well, as I said, Scheer's default, if he knows that this is coming, is just don't fight it because he's outnumbered. He doesn't want to fight it. But if I have to fight it, if I'm dumped into a scenario where, I don't know, I randomly take over Scheer's body halfway through Hipper's run to the south, so we're now talking about a historical Royal Navy with BT in charge of the battlecruiser fleet. At that point, as Scheer, there are ways of getting this done. Again, the temptation to abuse hindsight is quite severe, but trying to use the information that Scheer has to hand as best I can. The first thing is I'm going to ditch the pre-dreadnoughts. I'm going to tell them to catch up. Sorry, Rear Admiral Mauve, but there's ships that need killing. So I'm going to take my fastest ships and I'm going to tear up north maximum speed, and I'm going to go after BT ships with a vengeance. Unfortunately, because it's BT and he's managed to get a disjointed squadron, I'm going to have a much better chance of it. So BT is going to meet the leading squadrons of the High Seas Fleet full force, and that is going to go quite badly for him. 5th Battle Squadron probably is going to be able to make it out, because if they see BT getting trashed ahead, Evan Thomas and the other Queen Elizabeths are basically going to do pretty much what they did before, which is just turn around and make it away. Ironically enough, Warspite might not take quite the battering that she does, because as I say, 5th Battle Squadron is just going to probably nope on out of there when they see what's going on. Now, at that point, I've still got most of Hipper's battle cruisers vaguely operational, so I am going to send them north, but I'm going to send them north at a slightly slower speed, because I have left Mauve's forces behind, and I do need him to catch up if I'm going to have much of a chance. Plus, also leaving an abandoned squadron of pre-dreadnoughts somewhere out there is a recipe for them getting ambushed. Now, at this point, we're faced with a bit of a dichotomy, because BT heading north, I can't catch him with the High Seas Fleet. I've given him a very bloody nose by getting him to run into me, but I can't catch him. I know he's got 5th Battle Squadron with him, and however many extra battle cruisers I've managed to put down, sending Hipper's rather battered forces up against the Queen Elizabeth is not a recipe for any kind of success. So I'm going to shadow hit BT's remaining forces with 1st Scouting Group and tell them to report back. Now that means the 3rd Battlecruiser Squadron is probably going to get much further south. That actually gives me an advantage because 3rd Battlecruiser Squadron, after the drubbing I've given the Battlecruiser fleet, probably isn't going to have enough firepower to tip the balance back, and they are the most vulnerable. So at this point I can probably allow 1st Scouting Group to engage 3rd Battlecruiser Squadron as they did historically. And yes, unfortunately, that even with hindsight, that probably means Lutzel's going to buy it on the end of Invincible's guns. It's just one of those things. But the main thing is that with possibly even BT is dead at this point. Lion may well have been crippled. Although, if BT goes down and someone else has to take command, that probably actually means that Jellicoe gets more information, so maybe we don't want Lion taken out of the fight. Who knows? Anyway. I'm going to watch where BT's going, and because I'm shadowing him at slightly greater distance, chances are I'm probably going to see some indication that the Grand Fleet is present. Probably not the Grand Fleet itself, because they were historically hidden in fog and mist, but I'm probably going to start seeing the, say, the 2nd Light Cruiser Squadron, etc., and they're going to be all... they're going to be an indication to me that something bigger is out there, at which point I can start wearing around for broadside and hope that the enemy's coming to me, which they probably will. So then, rather than, again, trying to get this lined up with the camera, rather than getting this kind of semi-T crossing that you get at Jutland historically, if I've turned more east, you're probably going to get a converging engagement, kind of like this, which still isn't brilliant in my favour because I am outnumbered and outgunned, but it is much more favourable to me than ploughing in with just the Vanguard, which is not good. So I can probably get some more hits on the Grand Fleet than historically. I can do more damage, but as soon as the hits start adding up for me, although that will take longer as well, because remember, we're not going to have multiple ships concentrating on the Vanguard. It's probably going to be 1.5 versus 1, so 2 to 1 in some cases, 1v1 in others. So at that point, yeah, I do some more damage to the Grand Fleet, and then I'm probably, to be perfectly honest, as Scheer, just going to go, right, this is about the best it's going to get. I'm going to do a battle turn away, and I'm just going to run like hell. I'm not going to bother with any other kind of complicated tactics. I'm going to leave a fan of torpedo boats behind me, looking out for returning British ships, obviously throw some torpedoes their way on my way out, and I'm just going to keep going and going and going and going, and if any, it's going to be basically the Pirates Code. He who falls behind gets left behind at that point. So I'm going to arrive back in Germany, and what am I going to have achieved? I'm going to have achieved probably sinking at least half of BT's battle cruisers, maybe more, and almost certainly every single battle cruiser, bar probably New Zealand, because hey, divine intervention is not something I can do much about, is going to be very badly damaged. Any survivors? There's going to be a fair number of damaged ships in the Grand Fleet. I'm probably not going to have sunk anything. My own battleships will have taken some damage. Hipper's battle cruisers are probably going to be in slightly better condition because they don't have to do a death ride. And so overall, although strategically we're still back at square one, in that the British can still control the seas and I'm stuck back in Germany, pretty much cut the legs out of the British battlecruiser force. Their most likely survivors are going to be New Zealand, maybe a couple from 3rd Battlecruiser Squadron. So they're going to be back to their original... What? No? Yes? Yeah. Random. Nope, don't worry. We're back. Random glitch. I don't know. I've got an Ethernet cable connected. What more do you want, you useless technology? I have no clue. Yeah, the stream health is now fluctuating. And yeah, it's like I've got full internet connection. Who knows? Anyway, so yes. Anyway, what I've done? I've cut the legs out from under the battle cruiser fleet. They've maybe got 2 or 3 invincibles left. Whether or not I've managed to just tag anyone in 5th Battle Squadron, don't know. But the Grand Fleet is quite badly battered. So they've basically got no real scouting force. If I can get Hipper's battle cruisers repaired, I can quite easily run straight over what's left of the battle cruiser fleet in another engagement. There'll be a few more ships in the Grand Fleet that are damaged and need some harbour repair time. Now, granted, my ship's going to need a fair bit of harbour repair time as well, but you can repair a battleship or a battle cruiser in 4 to 6 months, unless it's absolutely plastered at worst. Now, compare that to how long it takes to build a capital ship, 2.5, 3 years. I think I come out ahead on that one, because even if they recall Australia, and even if you expedite Repulse and Renown, at that point you can just about match my first scouting group, especially once I get Hindenburg, in numbers, but there's no way you can match them in quality. I mean, Renown and Repulse, they're launched with the invincible level armor, so they've got the firepower, but they don't have the protection. So you're talking about a battle cruiser force that's got entirely inadequate belt protection, at which point first scouting group has the ascendancy. Now, do I want to get into another big fleet battle with the Royal Navy? Probably not, because they can bring out another Queen Elizabeth, they can complete the Revenges, their advantage in battleships is still going up, but I can make merry hell of any lesser engagements. So, yeah, there's that. That's how I would run the Battle of Jutland as Scheer. So, that's Drach's 2-part take on what would Drach do at Jutland, uninterrupted by the fact that apparently Wi-Fi is stupid. So apologies for that. So to celebrate that part, let us instead wear the pith helmet for a bit, and we now will open the floor to general questions for as long as it takes me to run out of iron brew and or voice. Glorious and courageous slug of... there's cruel and unusual punishment, and there's cruel and unusual punishment. Putting glorious and courageous... Glorious and courageous have problems with heavy seas, let alone heavy shells. Eagle1, do you have any plans to do an episode about the British Pacific Fleet and or Tiger Force? Yes, at some point, I will. What is Iron Brew? It is this. Iron Brew is girders. And it tastes like a combination of licking a small electric battery and licking some good iron rust mixed with fizzy. So, yeah, there's that. Anon Boy, do you know some of the service history of USS Lexington CV-16? That would be the Essex class. Yes, and I did plan a episode on that for when I was going to be in America, so that's all on hold until I get back to being able to make that trip. Basically, if there's a museum ship whose career I haven't already covered, then I'm going to be I want to try and get to that museum ship to do the episode on it, because I don't think there's much. I mean, yes, I could do the episode now, and yes, I could do it with the standard pictures, but come on, if the museum ship is there, you might as well just do it there. It's the same thing with like the Grom class, the Vasa. I mean, yes, I've done the Georgios Averov already, but I might as well do another one if I can get to Greece at some point. Yeah, questions are scrolling really fast, so I'm just going to have to try and pick. Otherwise, I'm going to keep reaching forward and back to try and stop the scrolling. Rommy's FD. British get Congos and put them in the battlecruiser force for Jutland. The Japanese... That's one way to break the Anglo-Japanese alliance. The Japanese were absolutely determined to keep the Congos in their own navy. The British did think about it, okay, for a bit, but the Japanese were like, no, these are ours and they're staying with us. Chernik, will there be any more featuring of naval-based games such as Rule the Waves 2 or others? Yes, I'll probably do another Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts live stream at some point. So when my key for Rule the Waves 2 gets sorted, I'll probably do something about that. Basically, obviously this live stream is Friday, so what I'm going to try and do is obviously keep up with the 5-minute guides and the dry docks at the weekends, keep up with the rum rations on Wednesday, and then anything that doesn't fit really into that particular format is going to go on the occasional Friday. It's not going to be a regular slot by far. That'd be far too much workload, especially with the day job. But for live streams like this, and for things like video games, board games that are naval related, then they'll probably find themselves a slot on the occasional Friday. Okay, let's have a look. Golden Eagle, why didn't the Brits build a few Congo class for themselves, not just Tiger? Well, the thing was, they were building Tiger, and then the Queen Elizabeth was supposed to try and bridge the gap, because the first Queen Elizabeth designs that they came up with were literally, here is Iron Duke with 13.5-inch guns. Now we will take that and we will just go, right, what happens if we replace the twin 13.5s with twin 15s? Oh, it's just a bigger version. So 10, 15-inch guns, 21 to 23 knots, etc. It's basically a slow battleship, quite very heavily armed at that point, but they changed it to the 8-gun version that could theoretically go 25 knots. When the speed didn't work out and the cost came in, then they went back to doing the cheaper version, which was the Revenge class. And the war had broken out at that point, so they weren't going to be doing capital ships for a while, and it was only through some shenanigans they managed to get Renown and Repulse through. Jay Richardson, have I returned to work? I never stopped working. I still do the day job. That's why I'm doing this relatively late on a Friday evening, because I'm working during the day. It's just I'm working from home. So there you go. Would you ever, Kamish asks, would you ever live stream a game of Battleship? I'd have to find someone else to play it with. Maybe Mrs. Drach could be persuaded to play a game of Battleship. That would be quite amusing. What's going on here? Whoop. Something's happening. Sorry, I seem to have lost the questions. There they are. Golden Eagle asks again, what engineering do you do as a day job? It's a mixture of things. Mostly these days transport and highway engineering, but it also requires a bunch of knowledge of civil engineering, which is what my original degree is in, because, as I said before, I'm helping look after the expansion of Croydon Town Centre, which means there's a lot of construction sites going on, and since I'm trying to look after the construction logistics aspect, understanding what the heck is going on with all the people building all the fancy tool objects is pretty handy. Ezekiel, are 5-inch naval guns much different from 5-inch tank guns? Yes, very much so. Naval guns tend to be massively heavier because, well, they can afford to be so, and they generally need to be with the mountings and such to aim high, because obviously, well, pretty much every 5-inch naval gun past about 1930 was able to engage an anti-air. Land-based guns, tank guns, actually tend to slightly longer barrels, but yeah, there's other things like naval guns are obviously weatherproofed against salt water, which does change their makeup somewhat. Basically, you can afford to be a lot more heavy engineering when you're doing a naval gun as compared to a gun that's got to be moved around on a vehicle like a tank or a self-propelled artillery piece, where although obviously it's got to be big enough and strong enough to fire the shells regularly, you've got to take into account it takes a lot more effort to move that thing on land. Ryan Chang, what would you consider the best anti-surface destroyer caliber gun of World War II? Probably something in the 4.5 to 4.7 inch range. The 5-inch 38 was a good gun, but it did, in order to get the excellent anti-aircraft performance, it had to be 38 caliber, which means that you just can't quite get the same level of anti-DD punch when you're engaging surface targets. I mean, that doesn't make it bad. It just means it's not excellent. It's in the ranks of, if you look on sort of the scale of dual purpose guns, where you've got like anti-surface and anti-ship, that's the same thing. Anti-surface and anti-air. The 5-inch 38 is kind of like this. It's very good at anti-air. If you take like 5 out of 10 as average, it's maybe probably about actually a 5 or a 6 out of 10 when it comes to anti-surface work. Whereas if you look at something like the 4.7 inch gun, for example, on the tribals, its shell's actually pretty much almost as lethal as the 5-inch gun, even though it's slightly physically smaller in caliber. But unless you do some unnatural things to the mountings, it's not as good at anti-aircraft work, and doesn't have the same kind of rate of fire in that role anyway. So it's a much better anti-surface weapon, not so good at the anti-air part. The 4.5 is kind of good at both, but cross comparisons are always difficult with that kind of thing. God Emperor of Mankind, oh my goodness. We are truly blessed. Ask, which battleship would you consider the least combat capable, not including ships that had been disarmed or repurposed? Well, the very easier one to answer with that was probably the Britannias, because it's going to be a World War One era warship. I mean, technically, you could actually argue Schlesien and Schleswig-Holstein, the two German pre-dreadnoughts, but do you really count those as battleships? At least if you're going to look this side of the dreadnought era, I'd say probably the Britannias, because the earliest thing the Japanese have is the Fusos, and they're markedly superior. The earliest thing that the British have is one of the Revenges. Well, technically by time of launch, it's actually Queen Elizabeth, and either Queen Elizabeth or Revenge is far superior to a Britannia. The oldest one the Americans have that's still in full battleship active service is Arkansas, and I'd put my money on Arkansas over Britannia any time, to be perfectly honest. What else have we got? Sorry, I'm just trying to see what this says. I really need to get a proper mouse for this thing. If you had to convert any World War II warship other than Yamato into a starship to save humanity, which one would you pick? Any World War II warship into a starship. And I can't take Yamato. Probably take an Iowa. It's nice and sleek and it's big. And there's plenty of space on board. And there's no waves in space, so you don't have to worry about that part either. Alden Consolver says, well, Arkansas was pretty lame. Well, there's Arkansas as an old 12-inch gun battleship, and then there's the Britannias. The Britannias weren't particularly good when they were launched, let alone in their basically unmodernized state by the time they get into World War II. Of the various ships present in World War II, about the biggest thing I'd throw against a Britannia and be confident of the Britannia coming out on top will probably be a Deutschland class. What kind of binoculars are they? They are 1940 Ross London binoculars, and yes, they are from an old naval ship. I can't recall offhand which one. It's actually embossed on the leather cover that they come with, but I didn't put that out here. It's still back in the old recording room. So yeah. Box Ghost, Britannia versus Scharnhorst. No! The Scharnhorst actually have armour. And good long-range gunnery. Remember, at the time the Britannias were built, the French didn't believe in long-range gunnery. Yeah, but granted, they did modernise them somewhat, but a Scharnhorst is, at long range is going to easily outshoot a Britannia. Yeah, I don't know quite what it is with the French. It's like for the pre-dreadnoughts the French built are just odd. The dreadnoughts the French built are awful. And then they seem to take a break, and then when they come back with Dunkirk, Strasbourg, and the Richelieus, I don't know what they found the original designers and drowned them in a vat of wine. I mean, Dunkirk, admittedly, is not the world's best protected vessel by a long shot, but they kind of redid everything with Strasbourg. Strasbourg's actually a pretty handy, nice ship, and the Richelieus have a fair bit to recommend them as well. No spaceship warspite. I'd love to see spaceship warspite, but to be honest, if I'm going to take a battleship up against humanity's enemies in space, I can't necessarily rely on plot shields, which is warspite's main strength at that point. Ryan Chung, will you do a special on the Battle of the Barents Sea? Yes, at some point. Albert Walding, did the quality of binoculars play a role in naval combat? Yes, actually. Depends on the era, though, because once you get into the era we'd normally talk about, World War I, World War II, in battleship scale engagements, most of the spotting is when they're looking for very sort of close detailing is actually mostly done by things like the rangefinders and other much bigger optical equipment. On smaller ships, especially in World War I and in earlier combats, even at Tsushima they've got rangefinders, to be honest. But in the late 19th century combats, then yeah, binoculars and telescopes are quite important at that point because they allow you to gather intelligence on your enemy before you get in gun range, actually, for a lot of the time. Oh my goodness, how on earth do you pronounce that? Theogaitondas Amphicolos, I think? I'm going to call him Amphora. Amphora asks, could the Japanese battleships have been better if they didn't go with turret farms? What no top hat anymore? Okay, let's have a different hat. We shall now answer in bowler. Yeah, so what was the question again? I've forgotten. Oh yeah, turret farms, Japanese ships. Yeah, they could have been, but the Japanese did have good reason for doing the whole turret farm bit. They wanted to try and ensure that the fact that they were probably going to be outnumbered wouldn't count against them, and so with their turret farming on the Fuso and Issei classes, the idea was that they could engage multiple targets at once. So yeah, one-on-one, yes, you probably could have done better with having sort of an American approach of 4 triples, which would allow you to shorten up the citadel, make them more heavily protected and so forth. But for the kind of engagement they thought they were going to fight, they made sense. They never actually ended up fighting that engagement, but there you go. Your accent isn't nearly stereotypical enough for that bowler. I can do the odd London accent. There's about 6, but I could do 1 or 2. But yeah. Bearing in mind I live in southwest London, there's probably enough people within easy reach. I don't want to try and get too many angry people after me. Colonel Haig, how do you feel about most sci-fi capital ships being multi-role instead of being only battleship or carrier, like Battlestar Galactica, etc.? It depends on the setting, to be perfectly honest. Spaceships are going to be expensive no matter what. So if you've got all your eggs in very, very few baskets, you kind of have to be a multi-role type of thing. But it's not ideal. If you can field the fleet to get mutual support, then sure, go for it. But if you're going to be out there alone, you do need to be kind of a jack of all trades. Otherwise, someone's going to hit you if you're where you're really weak. Weeb Extraordinaire asks, when do the 5.25 inch guns, or rather their mounts, become good? Late 44, early 45. Basically, they work out a lot of the bugs with the mountings themselves, and they also obviously start to get radar controlled direction and guidance for the actual anti-aircraft firing part directly, so they become a lot more effective at that point. Yeah, if anyone's asking, will you do a special on the Battle of whatever, the answer is yes at some point. Any notable major naval engagement, and probably quite a lot of the smaller ones, I will at some point be covering in Wednesday videos. It's just that the list is just ridiculously long. Scipio Africanus, at Jutland, how significant was the lack of air scouting by both fleets? It could have had made a major difference. The interesting thing is the German approach to air scouting at that point was via Zeppelins mostly. They did have flying boats and such, but they liked the Zeppelins for the long-range reconnaissance, and the Zeppelins operating at higher altitudes actually at Jutland probably wouldn't have been tremendously useful, because Jutland was characterized by an awful lot of fog, mist, and obviously later on gun smoke and then darkness, which is stuff that they are not really capable of looking through. The British had they had Engadine and Campania, neither of which actually managed to get fully involved. There's obviously, of course, the famous Rutland of Jutland, who actually did manage to get launched off of one of the little seaplane carriers and flew around watching everything for a bit, then discovered he didn't have an effective way of communicating with the British fleet, so he just got a bird's eye view of the whole thing without being able to influence it. I think that's actually probably fairly significant, because if the British had managed to get both Engadine and Campania operating with the fleets, and they'd managed to get their aircraft airborne and been able to actually communicate their findings, you might have got a very different outcome, because again, they could have done what BT wasn't doing and actually told Jellicoe what was going on. I know Golden Eagle's asked this question multiple times. How the heck did the British end up with so many different 13.5 and 14-inch guns? A lot of it is down to the policy at the beginning of the First World War of basically just grabbing everything that wasn't bolted or nailed down naval-wise. So you had Canada and Erin, for example. Neither of those ships were built for the Royal Navy, but both had guns in that caliber range. And so by taking them into the Royal Navy, they ended up having to use them with the guns that came installed with. Whereas if it had been down to the Royal Navy, they would have stuck with the 13.5s. Sprachlarera, I think. Why did Roma sink after a hit from a Fritz X bomb, but Warspite didn't? Multiple reasons. That long for this world. Mr. Higginbottom 1, Bismarck versus Tirpitz, who would win? Tirpitz, because Tirpitz is the later ship, and even by the time it's completed, Tirpitz... Oh, what the... Our stream is continuing. Another internet glitch. Stream is resumed. Are we there? Yes, we're back. Just watching the chat to see when it catches up. Lots of people with the Fs and everything, but I think we are... Okay, cool. Yeah, I don't know. Internet's completely stable from my end. Anyway, yes, the last question was Bismarck versus Tirpitz, who would win? And the answer is Tirpitz, because by the time Tirpitz was complete, it was already far more advanced than Bismarck. It had better radar, it had more advanced kinds of other bits and pieces. We lost the X weapons versus battleships. Oh yeah, Fritz X weapons. So Fritz X, the reason Fritz X sunk Roma and not Warspite was because it touched off one of Roma's magazines, one of the Fritz X's that was dropped on it. And once the main magazines go up, that's it. No battleship known to mankind has survived its main magazine detonating. Yeah, it's got to be YouTube. I don't know what it's like. I'm checking the IP, not the IP, the packet loss and everything. Everything's fine at this end. You couldn't be more hardwired into the internet than I am at this point in time. So yeah, so Fritz X versus Roma hit the magazines, and that was all she wrote. What's the time? It's 22:39, so I think I can keep going for maybe 10 or so more minutes. So let's break out the final hat of the evening. And see what questions we have. Oh yes, of course, this thing came with Norton antivirus installed. I'm going to have to kill that. That's probably half the problem, to be honest. Live Errors asks, how good a design is the Amagi class battle cruisers? They're not too bad. As far as the Washington cherry trees are concerned, the Amagis are the middle of the pack. So, oh my goodness, questions jumping around. Yeah, the Amagis are the middle of the pack. I wouldn't rate them quite as highly as the G3s, but they're definitely better protected than the Lexingtons in as much as they have a degree of protection in main fleet actions. Wow, and now it's catching up with all the questions, so now the questions are all over the place. Someone mentioned, I didn't see your name before it scrolled off, but you mentioned that the Japanese Navy had evidence that codes were broken and didn't tell the Japanese. The Japanese Army knew that some of the Japanese Navy codes were broken and didn't tell the Japanese Navy. Yes, that's completely true. As recorded, as you mentioned in Mr. Hornfisher's book. Yeah, they really, really didn't get on. Yeah, I need to get rid of Norton. I'll do that after this is done. Have you thought about doing a Let's Play of All the Waves 2? It would take far too long. I'd like it's like, yes, in principle, I'd like to do it, but in practice, it's not realistic. Whilst also keeping up my output of other videos. Austro-Hungarian Navy versus Italian Navy pitched battle 1915. Who would win? Oh, that's interesting. It depends who's having a good day. The Tegetthoffs don't have that much combat endurance due to the various design flaws in them. And the fact that poor old Sven Istvan, much as I do like this poor thing, was built very badly. Golden Eagle, have you managed to figure out why the Japanese Army and Navy hated each other so much? Just to answer the Italian, Austro-Hungarian. On any given day, I'd probably toss the coin to the Italians just about. But there are scenarios where the Austro-Hungarians might get ahead of things. Angel Apolinar. How are cage masts inferior to tripods or pole masts, since one shot at a tripod mast that hits the leg and the entire thing goes down? The main thing is that the theory behind the cage mast, which as you say is basically to let shot pass through, was fine. The construction of the cage masts wasn't so much, and also they were designed at a point that, bear in mind, the cage masts show up on the US pre-dreadnoughts first. Once you get up to the speed and vibrations involved with dreadnought type speeds above 20 knots, they start to suffer problems from sway, and they start to suffer problems from vibration, which basically, yes, in theory, they're technically a bit more survivable than a tripod mast, but you can't actually aim for toffee when you're using them at speed, which is a bit bad. They try strengthening them. The problem is it's this compromise between weight and stability versus strength. So you have I think it's Michigan's cage mast collapses, which is quite bad because obviously it's too lightly built. By the end of the First World War, when you get around to the Colorados, they are actually building cage masts much heavier, so they are more free of vibration, and they're free of vibration. They're more free of vibration and the other issues that they have. But they are much, much heavier at that point. Basically, to get a cage mast that can stand up to motoring around at 21 knots and not sway and vibrate like nobody's business, you have to build it so heavy you might as well put a tripod mast on and save yourself a bunch of weight. What's the worst loss of a Royal Navy warship in any time period? Probably Captain. It's one of the few time. Well, actually, no. You say that Captain is an easy one to go for because it's a pretty much it's an all-hands loss and it's unnecessary. Absolute worst loss, it depends how you define it. There are a bunch of, in the Age of Sail, a bunch of ships, such as actually the HMS Victory that precedes the one that's currently in Portsmouth dockyard, and that they go down, the previous HMS Victory goes down with all hands. And the first rate going down with all hands in the weather, that's pretty bad. But when you look at something like Barham or Queen Mary or something, the loss of life there is even worse. Now, Dr. Alexander Clark says you're rather blurry. Yeah, it's probably the webcam autofocus. It's probably autofocusing on the microphone or something equally stupid. I'm going to have to fix that. The thing is, I can get the webcam to focus on me when it's just me, but I'm trying to have like all the little bits and pieces on show. So I don't know. I might do the webcam a bit closer in. I might try and play around with the focus or something. I don't know. At some point. Someone asked, can we expect a 5-minute guide about the Viribus Unitis class? I did actually do one years ago. It's still in in Robo Voice. I need to revoice it at some point. I'll put that on the list of things to do. So for the last probably 5-10 minutes, let's move the noble amassment of hat back over there. And we shall revert to our original beauty. There we go. Well, the camera was set to 1080p. Maybe I need to change it to 720p just so it can keep up. But I don't want to start messing with the settings now, because then it'll probably just crash the whole thing. But I'll try streaming in 720 next time. Jonathan, was there armour angling, or did they just sail broadside shooting? Broadside was best from a gun accuracy perspective for most of the era when they're shooting large amounts of shells at each other from big battleship cannons, because it minimises the number of variables. But at the same time, different ships have different ideal battle ranges, and various captains and admirals would try and maneuver to take advantage of that. So you almost always had somebody pulling away or getting closer one way or the other, which meant that one side or the other was angled slightly. Angling your armour in the way that you can try and do in World of Warships, it does have some effect, but to be perfectly honest, to angle your ship sufficiently that the angle is going to make a significant difference as to whether or not the shell goes through is almost certainly going to mask your rear guns, which is actually a far bigger problem. Because if you can only use your forward guns, then you've got half or possibly less of your firepower, depending on what ship you're talking about. The enemy has all their guns, so the chances are they're actually going to score more hits on you. And it's not just your belt armor that's going to get hit. Your turrets can get hit, your bridge can get hit, your superstructure, the upper part of your hull, your bow. There's all sorts of things to hit other than your belt armor, which is why you want most of your guns in play as much as possible. Someone asked, why didn't they just install regular guns on export ships? Basically because whoever the customer was determined what kind of gun they got. They pay the money, they get the choice. Samuel England, which was the first ship to mount secondary batteries in turrets? Was it the Spheria class? No. Well, it depends if you mean the entire secondary battery in turrets, or if you mean some of the secondary battery in turrets, because technically the pre-Dreadnought secondary batteries, a lot of them were in turrets, but if we're talking about Dreadnought era ships, I think it was one of the early Italian ships, possibly Dante Alighieri, that had some secondary turret mounts on the on the main deck. But yeah. Stony Lonesome says, I swore I saw Drakinifel at a Queen of the Stone Age concert a few years ago back in the UK. Possibly. How long was my hair? It's not, well, to be fair, it's never gone. Is the plane an albacore? No, this is a swordfish. This is my pet swordfish. I haven't named it yet. Maybe that's a thing. Yeah. Name suggestions for the swordfish by email. Oh wow. Old Contemptible. Would the Battle of Cape Matapan have turned out differently if Andrew Cunningham preferred long-range gunnery to short-range gunnery? Cunningham liked exploiting his long-range gunnery as much as he could. The main thing with Matapan, or the night part of Matapan, was more than the British night tactics, which were nothing to do with their preferred gunnery range, and it was everything to do with the surprise factor that you could get away with radar. Because the one thing you've got to remember is when you're engaging smaller ships like cruisers or destroyers, very often they're going to have torpedoes. So if you're going to engage them in at night with guns, radar at the time of Matapan isn't fine detail enough to give you a long range firing solution anyway, so you're going to have to close in somewhat, at which point if you're going to close into within the danger zone of torpedoes, you might as well close in as absolutely close as you can to guarantee as many hits as possible. And you do basically what they did at Matapan, which is train all the guns at the enemy, and you just keep going closer and closer and closer right up until you see somebody so much as twitch on the other ship, and then you just ring the firing bell, and that's that. Samuel England says the entire secondary battery. It might have been actually for a full secondary battery, and if it's not a pre-dreadnought, the Sperias are probably in there with a good contention for it. I'd have to check though. Swordy McSwordfish face. Oh dear. Name it Stabby. I like Stabby. Stabby the swordfish. Stabby is the front runner at the moment, but yeah. Ideas by email. Maybe I'll have to get a small squadron. Yeah, Earl of Ireland says Montana cries with no battleship named after her. Yep, Montana had some really bad luck in that case. Every single time they tried to name a battleship after Montana, it ended up getting cancelled. Styro asks, why did only, I guess PS is maybe what the nomenclature of Norwegian ships. I know Norge is incorrect, but I cannot remember for the life of me off the top of my head what people told me the actual correct pronunciation was. So the Norwegian coastal defense ship that was named after Norway, why was it the only one to get firing solution on the German destroyers at Narvik as they went down at pretty much at the same time? I believe that's because the Germans were actually aboard Eidsvold trying to bluff their way in, and so they basically left and almost immediately attacked, whereas with the Norway, shall we call it for the minute, that was standing off a bit, so they had more time to take a bead without getting suddenly torpedoed or distracted by having German officers aboard. Kevin Kennelly, besides the Mark 14 torpedo, can you point to another instance where Buord dropped the ball? Yeah, the Iowa's turrets. I've mentioned that before. The Iowa's turrets were supposed to use the 16-inch 50 caliber guns that had been left over from the 1920 South Dakota class and the Lexingtons, and yeah, they dropped the ball so badly, not communicating with another department, that you ended up with the guns and turrets that couldn't fit the guns because the barbettes were too small, and that led to a crash program where they had to redesign to get the 16-inch 50 Mark 7. So they ended up building a brand new set of guns when they didn't actually want to originally. Yeah, so that was pretty. I mean, Buell, the list of their screw-ups is, the various derivatives, not derivative torpedoes, but the various torpedoes that surrounded the Mark 14. So the Mark 13 aerial torpedo, the Mark 15 surface launch torpedo, etc. They all had similar problems with the Mark 6 exploder, but that's technically all the same problem. They also screwed up with the Mark 18 electric torpedo. They literally had a German electric torpedo that they were supposed to copy, and they copied it so badly it worked awfully. Yeah, there's a long list of things that Buell got wrong. Mr. AVAC Kid, I think, says History Buffs in his latest video on Queen Elizabeth I takes a look at the battle with the Armada. Have you seen it, and if so, what do you think of his analysis? Yes, I've seen his video. I've seen the film that it's about, and yeah, I agree with his analysis. It's an awful way to depict the Armada. I went to see that film purely because they stuck the Armada on every blasted poster they put up, and I was like, oh, okay, they're actually going to do a film about the Armada. This is not something I've seen before. This is going to be good. And then it was about 5 minutes of flash cuts with the wrong people in command and completely the wrong storylines. So yeah, that was pretty awful. I don't know why Hollywood keeps thinking they have to put their twist on something like that. It's like the original story is good enough. Guy Liddon, did Trafalgar happen because France's officers and sailors didn't have enough experience, or because Napoleon pushed for a decisive battle? It actually happened. Trafalgar itself actually happened, and much as I really don't want to get into stereotypes, but it is going to sound like a bit of a repetitive thing, it happened because a French officer decided he didn't want his pride affronted. In this case, Admiral Villeneuve. And to be fair, Admiral Villeneuve's a bit of a weird one. He knew his men weren't ready for the Battle of Trafalgar, and this is why he was staying in port for so long. Then Napoleon got fed up. He wanted them to attack. Villeneuve didn't want to attack. Then Napoleon basically went, right, I'm going to replace Villeneuve and get someone who'll do what I want. And yeah, Villeneuve would rather sail out into a battle he knew he wasn't ready for than be replaced. And that's how you got the Battle of Trafalgar, in short version. Atomic Babel, which movie was better, Pearl Harbor or 2019 Midway? Oh, don't get me started. But of the two, I'd probably go with the 2019 Midway, purely because there's less annoying love triangles and they didn't have a bunch of modern US Navy ships exploding in the middle of the Pearl Harbor battle sequence. Devin, would you rather command a battleship or battlecruiser during World War I? Battleship. Much less chance of me exploding. And Golden Eagle asks, why did they stop building the Queen Elizabeth and Revenge class, since battleship superiority was what defined the Royal Navy? Basically, they reckon they had enough battleships, and they were in the middle of the middle of World War I. They were trying to build as much of everything else as they could, and they could only go so many ways. Somebody asks, if you could meet Captain Evans, what would you say to him? Damn good job. What else can you say to someone like Captain Evans? And it's just gone 11 o'clock, so I'm going to pick one or two final questions and then I'm going to wrap it up here. At least we only had one glitch and a bunch of stutters, so there's that at least. Let's have a look. What have we got? John Don Ho asks, could Japan have won World War II if its army and navy cooperated? No. Basically. They could have done a lot better, but they were never... Japan was never going to win once they decided to fight everybody, especially the United States. Anton Richard, will you make a video about the ship Vasa? Yes, I will. Once I can get out to... once I can get out to Sweden, I want to film at the museum. No Name says, Drach tell Wargaming we need HMS Agincourt in the game. Oh, I do agree. I do agree with that. I would love to see Agincourt. It would be hilarious. Irish Stereo asks, when looking to propulsion, except for triple expansion engines, why do all ships use geared or electric turbines? Is it noise or maintenance? You need the gear. Basically, the problem with turbines is that they spin really, really fast. And so you have to have some kind of way of turning that down, because otherwise you either end up spinning the propellers so quickly that they start cavitating and you lose a bunch of energy, and you expend massive amounts of power and don't go anywhere particularly quickly, or you end up running them really inefficiently at low speeds. So if you want, they do go with direct drive turbines for a bit because that's all they've got, but once you are in the realms of being able to put in some form of rotational velocity reduction measure, whether that be gearing or turbo electric drive or whatever, you do it as soon as you humanly can. Tree Shaker Tucker asks, have you heard about Nevada's wreck being found? Yes, I have, and I think it's quite good news. That's another wreck found. And last question for tonight. Spirit of 76 says, which two non-Commonwealth navies were best at working together? One can be Commonwealth and one not. Two best. We can't have. So we can have a Commonwealth navy, but one of them has to be not a Commonwealth. I would probably say the Polish Navy and your pick of the Royal. On the other hand, this was basically down to the fact that when it came to the Polish Navy, their main drive was, we want to kill lots of Germans, and we're also slightly mad, and we also have some very nice destroyers. And the various Commonwealth navies went, let's see, mad, nice destroyers, wants to kill lots of Germans. And as Dr. Alexander Clark will no doubt agree, long sideways glance, I guess we're sticking you with the tribal class flotillas then. Have fun. And they did. So yes. Oh, we're gone again. Are we back? Okay, so what did people miss? Because that was going to be my last question, but can't have it halfway answered. Video output low. halfway through the answer. I don't understand. This has got to be YouTube because my... Let me just check XSplit. Yeah, my bit rate's fine. Weird. Okay, so we're back. Right, okay, so to finish off the last question before we all get to go to bed, yeah, as I was saying, it would be the Polish Navy and your pick of Commonwealth navies, whether that be Royal Navy, Royal Australian Navy, Royal Canadian Navy, and that's basically because, as I was saying earlier, it's basically the fact that the Polish, when they showed up, yeah, they had submarines and such, but effectively the Polish criteria for continuing the war with their navies was, we have some very nice destroyers and we'd like some more. We're very angry with the Germans, so we'd like to kill as many of them as possible. Also, our crews are insanely aggressive and slightly mad. At which point, yeah, everybody went... And as I was saying earlier, before I got cut off, basically, as Dr. Clark would tell you as well, the Commonwealth navies kind of went, nice destroyers, mad, wants to kill lots of Germans. Tribal class flotillas, we have found you some new friends. Meet the Poles. You're going to get along very, very well. And yeah, that was basically that. Oh. Yeah, so with that, before the stream dips out again, I shall say thank you very much for watching, and farewell until, well, yeah, there you go. Thanks very much, and now probably YouTube won't even let me cut the thing off. Fun times. Let's see if we can make it stop.